Welcome to episode 14 of Michael Reads from a Book, a series in which Michael reads from a book. Today's reading is Jesper, Half Real. Video games between real rules and fictional worlds. We're going to be reading from the fourth chapter today, called Fiction. While all games have rules, most video games also project a fictional world. The player controls a character. The game takes place in a city, in a jungle, or anywhere else. Such fictional games obviously do not actually exist. They are worlds that the game presents and the player imagines. The focus of this chapter is what kinds of worlds we find in games and how games cue players into imagining worlds. Rules in fiction compete for the player's attention. They are complementary, but not symmetrical. Since all games have rules, and since rules are a distinct part of games, it was possible in the previous chapter to discuss rules mostly without mentioning fiction. However, it is not possible to deal with fiction in games without discussing rules. The fictional world of a game is projected in a variety of ways, using graphics, sound, text, advertising, the game medium, and the game rules. The way in which the game object behaves also influences the fictional world that the game projects. Though rules can function independently of fiction, fiction depends on rules. In Chapter 3, we found that rules are designed to be objective, obligatory, unambiguous, and generally above discussion. I'd say that in video games, rules are generally designed to be not a matter of discussion at all and hidden and mysterious. With fiction in games, we find the opposite is true. A strong part of the attraction of fiction in games is that it is highly subjective, optional, ambiguous, and generally evocative and subject to discussion. Rules in fiction are attractive for opposite reasons. Games project fictional worlds through a variety of different means, but the fictional worlds are imagined by the player, and the player fills in any gaps in the fictional world. Many games also present fictional worlds that are optional for the player to imagine, and some present worlds that are contradictory and incoherent. Fiction is commonly confused with storytelling. I'm using fiction to mean any kind of imagined world, whereas, briefly stated, a story is a fixed sequence of events that is presented, enacted, or narrated to a user. Herman Melville's Moby Dick is a story and a fiction, whereas a painting such as Georges Seurat's Le Grand Jeté is a fiction, but not a story since it only presents one moment in time. I will examine the question of games and stories at the end of the chapter. That's an interesting distinction. I wonder if you could actually have a game that contains a world but not a story. I mean, just the act of going through a game creates a series of events. Next heading, fictional worlds. What kind of places are Norath and EverQuest or the Black Mesa complex in Half-Life? They are not fixed stories, but fictional worlds. The theory of fictional worlds is derived from the concept of possible worlds in analytical philosophy. In its most basic form, quote, possible worlds can be understood as abstract collection of states of affairs, distinct from statements describing those states, end quote, from Preval. In fictional worlds, there's an important distinction between the description of a fictional world and the fictional world as it is actually imagined. The text of Hamlet describes a rather small world, mostly a castle in Elsinore, with some hints of foreign countries. At the same time, the fictional world of Hamlet is presented to be as large and detailed as the actual world. The work not only cues to the reader to imagine the state of affairs described by the play, but to make inferences about the larger world of Hamlet on basis of the text. Thus, the reader performs much work in order to imagine a fictional world, and consequently different readers and game players will imagine a fictional world differently. Much work, huh? Almost like reading a book is ergodic in some strange way. This is because all fictional worlds are incomplete. No fictional world exists that completely specifies all aspects of a fictional world. Quote, for several writers, incompleteness constitutes a major distinctive feature of fictional worlds. About complete worlds, one can decide whether for any proposition P, either P or its negation non-P is true in that world. Preval. They are incomplete because it's not possible to specify all the details about any world. For example, it is not possible to determine the number of children that Lady Macbeth has. This is an undecidable question. Any fictional world will be missing such pieces of information, some of which will be filled by the user, some of which will remain the subject of controversy. And that's our limit for today. I'll note that this text, especially this passage, goes very nicely with some reading I've been doing on Kendall Walton's Mimesis as Make-Believe. But that's neither here nor there. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you